when you go to kind of these marketing conferences there's speakers out there, it's almost like a lot of people go to these conferences to kind of understand how to evolve their business with, either if it's marketing automation, for example, it's like, how do they start and how do you kind of go through it? And I think that's the whole trouble a lot of these companies do. And we face that trouble, as part of the challenges that Jen's pinpoint is like, every company kind of goes through those challenges. It's like, how do we evolve from that? And how do you get started, I think is the big thing.
Welcome back. Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com. Who do we have?
Robin Kroll.
Chris O'Neill.
Jen Pugsley.
Kory Jazbec from RSA Canada.
And Michael Turksani. Welcome, Kory.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the podcast. Long overdue, really, when we think about it. But super excited to get this going. It's not our wicked cool looking podcast room, which you can kind of see in my background there a little bit, but nevertheless it's what we're working with in COVID.
That sounds good.
Awesome.
Excited.
So yeah, we're here to talk today about strategic marketing automation. That's obviously your role within RSA Canada, and some amazing work that we're very proud of with you guys over the last number of years, since I think 2015, right, Jen? Yeah. So we're excited to talk about this because we want to bring a lot of value to the audience around how to align your automation, how to get into automation, how to sort of align it really to sales, and what are we trying to do, what are we actually trying to achieve with that program, and kind of what do you need to start, and a lot of interesting little stories along the way of some stuff that we've done together. So before we get started, why don't you do a little intro, talk to us about background, talk about what you're interested in, what pumps you up about the marketing automation space?
Yeah, so I've been at RSA for just about 2 years now. So I lead up the digital and the marketing automation side of things. I came over from Walmart Canada, which I handled majority of the CRM from the B2C side as well. So I want to take a spin at the B2B world and understand how that all flows with respect to marketing automation. What kind of floats my boat regarding automation? I love data, and a lot of automation is driven from data and kind of the insights and understanding from what we can gather from digital interactions and how we can apply that in the marketing world, and how we can change the perceptions and behaviors of consumers based on what we see from their past behavior. And I think that's really interesting stuff. And you can get really granular and very detailed in a lot of the marketing flows that you can get, or the digital journeys. And yeah, from there, it's all about kind of optimizing the campaigns to making it work for your end consumer, whether it be, in this case, it's a broker, or whether it be an end shopper for an e-commerce site.
Awesome. So I know we're going to probably get into some background and some different stories around how to make that work. But I just pointing out, it seems like you love data. I don't know which direction you are actually going to end up on the screen. And Robin loves data.
I was thinking the same thing.
You were thinking that too. Big surprise.
Who loves it more though?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Whenever we do these, it's like the data needs to come into the conversation, which is good. I mean, that's Robin's the VP of Data and Insight. So, that's what.
Yeah. And I think, and even we talked about this before, actually we started, is that, data is the foundation for anything you do. So if you don't have that good foundational data framework, everything afterwards is just going to get even more complicated and complex, and you'll have to put some manual work in there to try to get the fix around not having that strong data foundation. So, that's why it's very important to kind of lay that foundation out first, so that everything flows nicely and seamless after you've set that up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, nobody likes to get an email or a campaign targeted to them that, you know, has your name in all capitals or, you know,
Yeah.
is spelled
Just
wrong.
K, hello K.
Yeah, hello K, right, comma, stuff like that. Or, you know, you dream up these awesome campaigns that, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could, you know, go after this group and a cross sell, and then you realize that it ends up being a big batch and blast because it ends up whittling down to the minimum level that everybody meets, which isn't very, can you know, can be not great if you don't have the data. So for sure, that's
Right.
always a thing.
I think too, on the relationship side of this business, whether it is broker to insured, or sorry, you know, carriers with brokers or broker to insured, the relation, I mean, and I always come back to this. I know the relationship's very important in a lot of businesses, but for this business, it's a very big thing. So it's even in some of our campaigns, we can't just, it has to be very fine-tuned on how we position the personalization or even the triggered message, as well as the content within, because you don't want to give off this impression that, you know, this underwriter doesn't know, or this sales guy doesn't know Bob when we went golfing, you know, or we went to Vegas 2 years ago with Bob, and now I'm being really impersonal. So I think it's that balance of, that plays a big role.
Yeah.
You know?
So maybe, Kory, I mean, like you kind of, maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of the contrast before we get into some of the points that we wanted to go over for the audience, but the contrast between the B2C stuff that you've got a lot of experience in and what you're now starting to see on the B2B side.
Yeah, and so the big difference for B2C, especially in the Walmart world where everything's moving 30 times faster than is you have to make change on a more frequent basis. So you're looking at data almost like on the daily, weekly basis. Where B2B, it's a little bit more longer tailed, where you wait for the data to come in a couple weeks, just because of the nature of the business, especially in insurances. I mean, when we talk about renewals or new business, it's a longer process to kind of get them up to speed or on board into the business, where on the B2C side, a sale is a sale, and if we don't capture that sale, they're going to some other e-commerce site, for example. So, I mean, it's more. I think it's faster paced on the B2C side. Again, it all depends on what type of business you are. But on the B2B side, I feel like it's more longer tailed, and we have to still continue that conversation, but it's at a longer framework than from a B2C side of things.
Interesting.
Sort of more in the moment, like probably around, I mean, we hope when we're running these journeys, even on a B2C basis, that, you know, people are listening, the consumers are listening, or they're at least picking up on sub themes that, you know, we're trying to impress upon them over time. But it does become a little more transactional, right? When you're kind of hitting on a B2C basis, like what
exactly?
Yeah, what immediate kind of outcome are we trying to generate, right?
Right. And you mean, for example, like with our, our pro digital journey, which you mean there is there's an Act On case study out there as well. It's longer tail. Like we want them to use the tools when they do have an opportunity for a quote and a bind, we persuade them or bring awareness to them to use the tool. And you mean this could be over 2 to 3 weeks, a month, 90 days. This is the kind of journey that we're looking at, where if you're looking at a Black Friday sale, it's like you need an immediate sale within the next 2 days. What can you do to trigger that engagement within the email or through mobile app? How can we trigger that? And how can we then follow up with subsequent offers based on that transaction? So I think it's again, it's very short tail, again, based on the time of period it is. But yeah, and that's kind of the nature of B2B and B2C from my perspective.
One of the advantages of that longer relationship is the ability to capture more data. So you know, it's longer tail, you are building that relationship, and there will be more opportunities to engage and capture more information. And then you actually have the time to be able to integrate that data to continue the conversation. And that really quick transactional, more retail perspective, you don't always have the advantage to doing that. So to me, that's definitely an advantage of B2B versus B2C.
For sure,
Oh,
like just to
yeah.
touch on that point, is a lot of the consumers on the retail side, especially during big sale periods, are one and done customers, right? So they come for the sale and that's it. You don't see as much as life cycle marketing you inject, they're still not coming back. But here, like you said, Robin, it's you can continue that conversation, try to build the relationship up with the broker, and then hopefully it allows them to bring that better business because of the value that you're showing them on a consistent basis through the different touch points that you have along that digital journey.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place for us to maybe get in as we think of, like, I know one of the things we were going to address is really getting started. I mean, RSA Canada, they're doing some cool stuff. I mean, it's not like a horn toot necessarily for us. It's certainly from your side, being visionary in this space, but they are. I mean, you're kind of moving the needle on communication programs that are, we don't see that across the board right now. And I would, maybe we touch on this sort of like before we get into like how to get started. Maybe it's like, why would you get started? Because something that you just mentioned sort of led me to think, if the value that you want to provide to your audience is of a longer term kind of horizon, where you want to educate on the things that you can do for them, and you want to bring value to that audience in different ways, then that almost puts a requirement in place for automation, because it's a tool set that allows you to facilitate that type of strategy rather than just doing one-off blasts everywhere.
Right.
So I think we should touch a little bit on, like, brands. I mean, insurance companies, as an example from you guys, that, if you're really looking to kind of create that presence for an organization, that becomes one of the inflection points to sort of look at automation, and touch on that maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think if you're in the marketing space for a while, especially in the digital market, you have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what's been kind of my evolution the last few years? And if it's kind of a lot of companies, and they kind of get in that rut, this kind of the status quo. It's been working for us. The batch and blast. We see the uptick when we send out our email. We're happy with it, but at that point it's not good. Like, you always have to strive for improvement, and I think that was my inflection point, at least, was like, after a year, 2 years, 3 years doing the same thing, you're like, okay, like, you want to add a little bit of excitement to your own personal career skill set, and build and try to evolve that marketing view of how to really communicate to the end consumer. And I think that's what when I joined RSA, that's kind of the direction that was given, was basically, how can we amplify this customer relationship we have with the brokers? Because RSA is known for that, is working directly with the brokers, and those are our end consumers. And how can we nurture that relationship, and really build that relationship along through that digital journey with really relevant content that kind of hits home, gives them what they need to communicate to their customers, and then that helps foster the relationship moving forward. I think that's one of the big things, especially like, RSA again is unique as we gear towards the brokers, but you can apply that to end consumers. It's the same thought process as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying there, in terms of that relationship. But I think one of the things that RSA has done well over the last couple years, especially, is really getting that kind of like getting sales on board. And I know we're going to peel that into a different point of the conversation, but using automation in that really personalized way, and not cold experience, to that scares a lot of people. That scares a lot of large brokers. Certainly scares a lot of carriers. So I think that, whereas in this case, I think we baby stepped it in a way but pushed it, quick enough that, we didn't allow it to hang everything up, but it's been a positive thing. I think there's a lot more to go. but yeah, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but that's a big part
Yeah.
of the whole transition.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, yeah, if you talk to any sales guy, it's yeah, I like to pick up the phone and do my thing, right? And that's been kind of the traditional way, especially in the insurance space. And I think the scary thing is when we communicate automation to the sales guys, it's like they're a little bit defensive in terms of, oh no, automation is going to replace my job or whatever it is, and it's not the case. It totally isn't the case. It's more there to help complement the conversation. Still pick up the phone and have that phone call with the broker, but we have that automation kind of campaign to help complement that conversation and continue it down the road, so that we can create the alerts if they have some sort of digital engagement with a specific email or a website interaction. And again, we can follow up. We can send alerts back to that sales team to say, hey, this broker just engaged with us in this way. Might be a good time to follow up with a phone call, right? And so I think it just gives them a little bit more fuel, a little bit more leverage to add in their back pocket, that they can, almost like an icebreaker, that when they do talk to the broker, they have that knowledge of backhand. Hey, we noticed that you downloaded this, or we saw that you read this email. What drew interest of it? Blah blah blah. And I think that's kind of the important thing that we want to stress here is that, and we're not here to replace, we're here to complement. And by doing that, it just helps the whole selling process and / retention from the sale to the brokers. And we've also done it from an underwriting side as well, where underwriters are continuously following up with phone calls, which is great. But we injected some automation in there too. After that phone call, it's a simple, nice gesture reminder of an email of all the features and benefits and all that stuff that helps hopefully sell the quote through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great,
So
yeah.
Chris, now's the sales side. So I know you want to jump in, but I think this is great. I think it'd be nice for you to add on to whatever you were going to say, which might be this, but we can switch gears in terms of how you use it, because you're involved in the insurance industry in a big way and powered by marketing automation ourselves, but also just picking up on the whole kind of sales alignment piece. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was thinking as Kory was speaking there about how, what is the impact to the sales team and the ownership of a brokerage when something like digital marketing or marketing automation sort of comes into the picture. And I think that Kory's very right that there's a little bit of intimidation there. There's a little bit of like, how's that going to affect me? These organizations don't actually realize how much data they are actually using when they actually get a list. They get a list. They're accustomed to kind of taking a list and just banging that phone until they get somebody on the phone and then doing their thing. The realization when we have gotten involved with an organization with some digital marketing and marketing automation is that it really is adding a layer of personalization to the conversation and a whole lot less sort of cold call, nothing happening. So I think that there's that sort of learning curve of what does this mean? What does the digital marketing layer and the marketing automation layer mean to what it is that our overall goal is as a company? And when one sort of like puts it all together and realizes that, this is something that is going to take some effort to sort of put in a sensible manner, to, not sort of, not to sort of drive everything towards a pure digital play all at once, but to sort of layer it in a way that sort of makes sense, that supports the growth strategy at a, in a meaningful way. That's the sort of the way to sort of lean into it. I can't tell you how many conversations we've had where there's sort of an understanding that we need to move to digital, but we don't, like a company, a broker, they don't know really what to do in terms of the first thing. What's the first thing that we should do? And then in terms of sort of putting that sort of roadmap together, which is obviously just sort of setting up the foundation, putting together that sort of 6 to 12 to 18 month plan of rolling it out. There's a recognition that this is not something that is going to make a 180-degree turn all at once. It's an iterative process that's going to take, it's going to take time and thought to kind of put it in gradually, and you build those blocks sort of as you go in a way that actually makes sense. The interesting thing is, from a sales perspective, there's never fewer salespeople that are needed to sort of make that happen. Sure. What you are focused on, though, is making sure that those salespeople are involved in the conversations at the right time.
Right.
The thing about the brokerage business, though, it's been such a pure sales play for a long, long time. It hasn't been about data, up until probably 10 years ago. It wasn't about data. It was about activity. It was about making enough calls to sort of like,
relationships,
and just basically building it up on the basis of that one-to-one thing. And that still exists. That's still really important. You talk to any commercial broker out there, that's still going to play a major role. And it's not going to take away from that whatsoever, but it's like, how do you use those digital tools? How do you use those marketing automation tools to enhance that relationship, to make that relationship actually a little bit stronger?
Well, and I think the P&C, so when your comment there, Chris, about, brokers, whether they're small or large, it's actually the P&C industry as a whole, right? If you in Canada, if you go to life, I mean, it's come a long way in 5 years, but if you go to life, health and benefits, that sector, you can see the digital adoption is sometimes broader in that realm than you can in the home and auto. I mean, obviously personal lines is a lot further ahead in some cases than commercial lines, but yeah, I think it's a P&C thing mostly.
I just wanted to pick up on the points that were also made about this concept of, the digital adding to the conversation, because Kory, we hear that a lot, this concern about this automated communication coming in. And that concern, I think, is rooted in the fact that, as a broker, I have a conversation to my end consumer, or as an insurer, I have a conversation to my broker, and this fear that this automated conversation is going to come in and it's going to be in a completely different line, as in it's going to, it's not going to have any connection to that conversation or that relationship that's building, with the fear that, you're actually going to derail everything that I'm going to be doing. Because there's not an understanding that actually that conversation, the digital automated conversation, is meant to work really well with and in conjunction with that one-to-one personal conversation. And that not only is that conversation not impersonal, it's actually data driven. So it is based on what we know about the end person that we're talking to. It's things that they have overtly told us, meaning the types of coverages they're interested. It's also based on behavior, depending on the type of content or the channel of content where things are actually digested. So in many ways, it actually has the ability to be more personal and relevant than what the type of conversation an individual is happening, because there's so much more data. And I think if there's a way to get get that understanding brought through, that's where you can sell on the value. And that also brings back to the whole data point, which we started with, because the more data that you have available, the more powerful that automated conversation can be.
And I think, just to touch on that point, I think, data is very important, and sometimes the data can be very overwhelming. And then I think this is a lot of challenges people have as well, is like, I got lots of data, but where do I start? And I think that's the biggest concern, or biggest challenge people have, is like, where do I start with this data? And then, we always talk about kind of the the crawl, walk, run approach, right? So start small, like start with one or two different, and that's what we're doing, especially with like in RSA, where a lot of people who aren't exposed to digital marketing and don't understand it, like the nuts and bolts of it all, is we have to kind of take them through that process of building it out slowly so that they can see the entire picture. And it's not about, like what you mentioned, Chris, not about building the 18-month 30 communications in all 18 months. It's like, let's start small, figure it out and learn and optimize and then build from it. And I think that's what we've done specifically on the underwriter side is start small, learn, and then continue to build and grow from it based on some of the data that we're seeing from all of the digital engagement. I think it's a big thing to do, especially when you have lots of data, because insurance companies have lots of data. It's just how to manage and manipulate it in a way that's meaningful for your end broker.
Yeah, I love what you say about the data. Like there is tons of data, but it really is a shift for these principals who have been they have been growing on the basis of the good service that they're providing. That's a given. Good service. That's not a differentiator. That is what everybody's doing. Good service. And then it's like, how do I grow? Well, I know that if I hire a sales rep, if I hire a broker, I'm going to be able to expect this kind of growth. I know what that math is. I know what that is. What I don't know is if I bring on board some kind of a system that I don't understand, what is that actually going to do for me? And that's, as you say, the education portion of what does it mean to kind of add one of these layers of communication? What does that mean? Right. Because you're sort of, and I know the ROI question is always in the back of their head. When am I going to see some kind of a return on this? Well, we have examples, we have case studies and stuff like that, but always there's that uncertainty around, I've never done that before. What I know is I know how to look after a customer and I know I can do that. But what I don't know is what does it mean if I start investing here? And that's where, again, from you're dealing with brokers all the time, obviously sort of introducing to them to the services that you have, et cetera, which, the automation is built into those, communications. You must be, constantly having that dialogue. Oh,
for sure. And it's funny because as we built up a lot of our automation, and we built up the automation to have different from names based on different stakeholders in the business, based on what product line they're from, and the reply to address always goes to our general RSA broker inbox. And it's funny, when we send out these emails, we get some reply backs thinking that the end user was actually that person who sent the email when it was just kind of an automated message. So we get this heartfelt message back to the inbox saying, "Oh, thanks, thanks, Michael, for that, that message. It meant a lot, blah, blah, blah." But in the end, Michael really didn't know that he sent that message.
That means it's working, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it speaks to the growth, the success that you guys have had with automation. You mentioned, Kory, starting small and where do you start? And I think even organizations watching this, I think if you're, another carrier and, another kind of market, so to speak, you could probably connect with it a bit more to say, oh, okay, there's, probably an investment that RSA Canada's made, and it's been a growing thing. It's not like you said, you have to crawl into it, but but I think what's often misunderstood is, if you can actually start relatively small. I mean, the platforms themselves are within reach for, I would say, most businesses that would be listening to this podcast. You don't need to have a whole team around it and all that type of thing. But, and as you grow and as you have an agency, then you have roles like yourself that evolve within the organizations to really, understand the value within the corporation. But I think it's often misunderstood that you can get going and you can start improving the way you're running your marketing communications at a relatively small point, right?
No, I totally agree. And Jen, you can allude to this as we kind of built up a case study for our RSA Pro tool when we started back in, I think it was 2016, 2017, we started RSA Pro. I was still before my time, but basically we've evolved. We started maybe with just a couple onboarding emails for our RSA Pro tool. Now it's evolved to this, onboarding, retention, win back, digital journey that accompanies probably 18 to 20 different emails. And that's over a course of, 4 to 5 years that we've kind of built on this. And it's just test and learn, optimize from our learnings, understanding the data, see how each broker kind of flows through each communication touch point, learning from that, and then evolving and testing and kind of going through that same iteration process. And that's where we started. We started small, and now we've gotten to a point where, it's not a set and forget because we're always looking at the different touch points, but it's understanding that data and then continuing to push and understand what gets them engaged specifically from an RSA Pro tool standpoint.
Yeah, I think, I remember one of the drivers back years and years ago was insurance carriers incentivize heavily. Like, it's just kind of known all over the place that it's the next Visa card or the next, and even I won a pretty big Visa card back in the day. It wasn't digital though, but you're kind of, so you're relying a lot on, there's business metrics to go and create those incentive campaigns, but there's not a science to it, right? So whereas here, when you can actually incorporate smart incentives to say, well, wait a minute, maybe it's these guys that we should be giving the iPad to warm them up, or vice versa, right? And I think that's a really big takeaway, because there's tons of dollars that go into incentivizing every single year, and it can allow you to just, I wouldn't say pull back, but use it in a smart way. So I remember that being a driver, and like you said, all of the lead up. I remember our audience was very small back in that day. And then when I think we revamped some of those onboarding programs this year, and looking back at the original ones, I was like, wow, these aren't that bad.
Yeah.
I mean, they've come a long way, but they
Yeah.
weren't. Yeah, so
that kind of leads us, I think, to another kind of good angle, because I think we're coming up close on timing, if I'm doing the math in my head. But I thought we've kind of covered on the things that we wanted to talk about. I mean, Kory, you sort of went into the data and insights a bit, and we can expand on that for sure if you want to go into it. But we did talk a bit about getting started, and that you can start small, and the critical importance to aligning something like this with revenue, and that might start with understanding engagement, but then growing and trying to get close to the business unit, that is ultimately that sales organization that you can sort of build those two-way pieces. We talked about that. And then you'd mentioned optimizing something like the Pro Journey with the data and insights piece being key. But I thought maybe we could touch on that a bit more if you want within this context. But this RSA case study that was done by Acton that you had participated in is amazing. I mean, it's really tells, if go to our website, I think it's on our blog, and it's all over our social media. I know RSA Canada posted it on their social on LinkedIn. It's a great way for somebody to get an outside view as to how this could help them. But why don't you tell us an area, maybe you want to weigh in too, Jen, like what's a fun, exciting, maybe more recent thing, or something that's kind of really taking, all of this stuff together now in context that you're working on? Like what's a fun and exciting kind of automation program that you're underway with?
Yeah.
Or that you've done, or that you've already done.
I think it is Pro. I think Pro is kind of the case study of all case studies, specifically for automation. And anything else that we do is we try to align it to how we kind of started with Pro, right? Like, when we talk on the PI side, and the reason why it's easier with Pro is that we can easily align the sales data is all kind of aligned within our CRM as well, right? So it's easy and accessible. which allows us to trigger automations based off of the sales data that we see. On the PI side of things, we're still trying to figure that out and trying to connect all the dots to kind of get that automation going. But I mean, one of the evolutions that we've had is, and Jen alluded to it earlier, was that especially incentive-based campaigns is typically, RSA Pro, obviously the underwriters and in the SME space is they're continuing to sell and try to get quotes and binds, and I mean that never stops throughout the year. But over the last few years, we had injection points where we would introduce a standalone campaign with an incentive based. If you log into Pro, you qualify for an incentive. And we had like 2 or 3 a year, and we saw lifts. We saw some great lifts with that campaign, those campaigns. We wanted to kind of evolve from that. And so as we continue to build our digital journey with RSA Pro, we started to continue that conversation based on, how many people have logged into the tool, who haven't logged in, who hasn't quoted, who has quoted, and kind of really understand the data. And now within that, our overarching digital journey for RSA Pro, we've now, instead of doing the standalone campaign along with the journey, we've actually done the incentive built into the digital journey as well. So now it's almost like your and that's automated. So now it's like your flash sale within our digital journey. So depending on where you are in the digital journey and who you are, you'll get a reminder about our specific campaign incentive. And so it's not kind of a standalone campaign that we're running separately from our journey. It's now all kind of engulfed and embedded together, which makes it really good because now you can see the evolution and kind of standing away. Our marketing manager is really happy because now he doesn't have to think about separate campaigns. He can just kind of inject incentives based on where people are in the journey and try to persuade them to, for tool adoption and binds and quotes. I think that's kind of a really interesting step, and it's giving us a lot of data, which is great. And again, hoping to learn from that and optimize further down the road to continue to build this big flow of digital communication touch points.
Yeah, I think Kory, it's a really good point that you make for a number of reasons. Like I know Kory, the always on journey was your vision when we first came in and we started to like revamp this thing 2 years ago, and or a little shy of 2 years ago. But I think it's really starting to show its fruit because the whole industry, brokers are just inundated with 30 other markets of communication, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like if we're doing some big, huge, themed campaign 4 times a year, which there's value in that, right? You say it's heavily incentive based, but then Intact's doing it and economical, like they're all doing it. It's right. Very hard and overwhelming for somebody to kind of digest all of that, all of those emails, all of those.
Well, and it's not in context either, right? And I think there's a tendency, right. And this is the argument that so many marketers have as it relates to batch and blast, is they'll say, well, but
sales are down.
What's that?
Sales are down. Let's pump
sales are down. Let's blast the whole list, and maybe well, if we segment, maybe we'll miss people. And I think I agreed, but I think the journeys that you're describing are more in context, and then the people that are responding to those, you're going to like have higher response rates, and then you've got less of just a fatigue generally of your brand and erosion of that process because they're not getting hit all over the place, and when they do get hit, it's much more meaningful, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think bring it back on the retail B2C side, you're not making habitual for the end brokers to say, you know what, I'm not going to quote in Pro because they don't have a contest yet. Right. I'm going to wait for that contest to come, right? Like when you think about any clothing retail now, how many people just wait for that 40 to 50% off and they don't shop about it, right? So you're creating that kind of that bad habit of waiting for the sale or waiting for the incentive from a B2B side of things. So we want to kind of make that more of a consistent, always on approach where we're continuing to deliver on an ongoing basis and setting the expectation with the broker that, we're always there no matter what. We're not just going to incentivize you to try to get your business.
So the other aspect of that story that I love, Kory, is that you didn't have this fully baked when you started, right? So you had the initial journey, you had the incentive campaigns that came in, you tested them, they worked well, and then you integrated them into the journey. And I think it's important for people who, as you were talking about people where to get started, feeling it's overwhelming, but you don't have to know all the answers up front, but you have to be willing to do some test and learn. In this situation, it's great the incentive campaigns work, but there are going to be other situations, there are things that don't work, but it's all part of a learning process. And then you integrate that learning, and gradually you're improving that journey and that relationship.
Yeah, and to touch on that, it's like, it's a big thing, it's a big cliche. It's like you can't be afraid to fail, because failing is learning, right? And so if you think everything is perfect that you're doing, then good for you, because you've struck the silver bullet right away. But a lot of people aren't on that same trajectory. They'll have to fail a little bit or it doesn't work, but you understand that it didn't work, and you can move away from that and test other things as well. So I think that's a big thing, specifically in automation and in marketing in general, is just always being willing to optimize, test, and learn from that. I think that's a big thing, especially because on the digital side of things, you can measure everything, and that's the beauty of digital and marketing automation, is like you can measure, you can see where people are clicking, what they're engaged with, and really understand that data to your advantage.
And that digital timeline becomes, an asset to the business from how you guys are, not only measuring your engagement and your base and how communications are being consumed, right? Because you have a whole lot more than a basic system that would just give you opens and clicks. Like a digital timeline gives you days, months, years of history of how an audience is basically engaging with all kinds of different digital telemetry. But I think it also helps you, as you just sort of touched on, learn kind of more, I guess, more agilely or something. Or you're able to be more agile kind of in the moment. And if all you're kind of left with is an open and a click report, and the system's just not intelligent enough to have something that, I can look at a timeline. Hey, this happens to be within the CRM too, i.e. the Pro RSA Pro environment. Maybe for our other stuff, it's not, and we have to do a little data on the back end. But now maybe it's not exactly to the level of, B2C that you would have to be pushed to in that environment because the user journeys are shorter, but certainly allows you to look at a program after a couple of weeks and say, yeah, you know what, we think we need to pivot around this. Let's not do something like that again, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's all part of how we started out specifically with Pro, is we learned a lot. We pivoted away from things that didn't work. And we're finding that kind of that sweet spot where we think things are working, and that we're continuing to optimize and working from that. So I think it's a good advantage from that standpoint.
Well, when you're looking at all the data across every channel, every digital medium, going back to that tagging and that tracking, it allows us to pivot with the times, right? So we all know that email has been exhausted a bit in this whole COVID scenario, but so it does allow us to say, okay, well, we've got 6 years of history and data across all these different digital mediums. So if we see that, we don't have any indicator, but if we see that, emails dropping, then we can pick up.
But I think what we've also seen, sorry, Jen, just to cut in on that, and maybe you could add on to it, is that through this COVID period, is that email is becoming a very critical communications channel. I mean, obviously we relied on it. There's the whole go paperless movement within the insurance industry. Yes, you got it. It's not secure to the extent of, of the login and these types of things. So there's all kinds of important implications, but, you've got, in the school system, you get an alert, those alerts come over email, and, maybe even more so now post COVID, to say, get your email together, this is not a MailChimp. You need to have a platform that builds an email as an asset and a communication strategy. And, that's reading this case study, that's that natural evolution into an automation system. And then what you're talking about is don't use it like a batch and blast,
Right.
Build a strategy, but crawl, walk, run into that and as you go. But certainly I think, it's like, if you don't have a reliable, functional, clean email strategy that you can look at as a business and say, we know what this is, then you're at a major disadvantage, I think, going forward.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, to your point, Michael's like, start with email, something that everyone's comfortable with, and then venture off into different other mediums. Maybe it's mobile text, or maybe it's through other communication methods. I think, you can evolve, start with email, which is a good framework to start, and then evolve to other touch points that maybe the end consumer might be engaging with a little bit more, whether it's through social or through mobile and so forth.
Yeah.
Jen, did you want to add anything onto that, or did I just cut you off and ruin your
Yeah, no, that's what I'm talking about.
I ruined your train of thought. I knew it.
You picked up on my.
Okay, good. I did.
It's critical it's more critical now. You picked up on that, but I also wanted to. It also allows us to say, is this getting a bit fatigued?
Use it wisely. I don't disagree with you. Using it wisely was kind of what we were talking about just before, right? Batch and blasting, everybody is not using it wisely, right? Yeah. So if everybody's getting hammered and their inboxes are being hammered, then, come up with things that are smart and in context and relevant and timely and personalized. It's going to go a heck of a long way.
Yep.
Than just getting the generic stuff. What else do we want to throw on the table, guys? Because it's 50 minutes. It's close to 50 minutes here. Or maybe it's 45.
Oh, it's already been going that fast, yeah.
Yeah.
So are all the good are all the good marketers going to B2B? So we've got this Walmart guy that moved over to a B2B thing, and now all these retailers are sending out, batch and blast and sort of telling you when the big sales are coming. Like, have all the good people moved over to B2B?
I think it's a tough space, right? Well, especially with COVID and everything. I think there's a lot of lost sales that happen, especially from the bricks and mortar perspective. So I think they're trying to recapture a lot of lost sales, specifically on the retail side. Like guys like Walmart did fine for the most part. And so, it's more so just capturing that point of sale at the right time and trying to capture a lot of sales from my perspective, I think. From a B2B side of things, I think, again, it's just continue to foster that relationship, right? I don't think much changed, especially in the insurance space. Much hasn't changed in terms of how we communicate. I think, obviously, the in-person stuff has. So that's why an even more digital approach to how you communicate out to your end consumer is very important. And it might continue. We don't know how long that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. So I think it's even more so important to kind of start ironing out that strategy from a digital communication standpoint.
Yeah.
So you talk about at the end of this case study that, you guys have been doing this now for, I guess, 5 years. It's been 5 years. The strategy has been evolving and rolling out, and great numbers obviously in here. And you sort of mentioned that you still think sky's the limit. So, that's awesome. Anything you want to talk? What's that?
Yeah. What's next?
Yeah. What's next?
Obviously, what's next is, we continue to, kind of doing an end loop of our conversation is continuing to maintain our data, right? So data, as we get more data, obviously, the more data in, the more risk for, quote unquote, dirty data. And so we continually make sure that we want to maintain a clean database, whether that means removing inactive people from your list, seeing who's engaged, and kind of really honing in on classic database marketing strategies and working with the ones that are responding to you, and giving them the level of effort that you want to see, because you'll probably regain more business from those guys than kind of like your one and doneers who aren't as interested anymore. And so even a big data strategy, not a big data strategy, but just a maintenance campaign that we continue to do for our data. And then just some more growth growth initiative campaigns to support our sales guys. I mean, we're in a growth year, and so we're seeing how we can interject automation to help complement their process and business operations to help support them and understand how they communicate out to the brokers and how we can interject those automated triggers to the brokers to, again, continue that conversation. So, I mean, those are the big things that we're working on. And then obviously from a pro perspective, we're continuing to evolve that massive flow diagram that we have, which is great. I mean, my vision when I first came here was my whole thing was like, let's create this huge Microsoft Visio flow diagram of all the different touch points that these consumers or from these brokers have from an onboarding, retention, and a win back. Because I mean, brokers kind of fall into that whole strategy is like, and let's have that diagram and then pick out different communication touch points and optimize and try to find what works and what doesn't work. And we're getting to that point. I think we've built it out pretty good, and we're going to continue to evolve that, I think, which is great.
Kory, I wonder if you can comment on reporting as part of maybe the next stage, because one of the things that we see is that is very often one of the last steps that's
exactly
really done, because there's so much data, and how do we actually build these reports?
It's true, and it becomes overwhelming because you have so many pieces of data, and I mean specifically with our team as well, and you're kind of, because we're a leaner team, you kind of gonna get into the execution of it all and the build, and you're like, okay, it's out. You get a little bit of a sigh of relief and that it's out, but I mean, you got to get to the data part, and people often miss or let it slide, the data part, right? And so, you mean, that's kind of the forgiving part of a B2B is you can have a little bit of a delay, where B2C is like, okay, we sent it out, the next day, what's the results? Where B2B is like, we can wait, 7 to 10 days, maybe 14 days to see what kind of those results are, and then be able to pivot. But yeah, it's just basically making sure that the tracking is all there and the reporting is there in terms of your basis KPIs, right? So aligning those report metrics to the KPIs of the campaign, whether it be sales, whether it be tool adoption, whatever it is, renewals, whatever your KPIs are, make sure that you're lining up the campaign to make sure that you're reflecting those business KPIs. And then if you're not hitting them, just being able to pivot, optimize, test, learn, pivot, seeing if that works to kind of trigger an uplift in those campaigns, in those metrics.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I think that this has been fantastic. I don't know if if you want to come back on, Kory, I'm sure we could probably be chatting for hours.
Oh, I know. I didn't even know that much time went by already.
No, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, we love these long podcasts, lots of great content. And yeah, I mean, it's hard because we're packing in so many awesome topics, right? That we're trying to get out. But I think this is going to be great for the audience, and really appreciate you doing this. And,
no problem.
Really, really love working with you and the team, and with you guys for so long now. It's like,
yeah, no, it's been great. Like, obviously, I mean, partnering with you guys has helped us, expedite that automation process. And I mean, some people don't have that luxury of, having a great support like you guys to really fulfill those expectations. And so, it's been great. You guys are kind of like the extension of RSA Canada, which is good. And so I think we've gotten to that point, and we'll continue to lean on you guys for that extra support for driving home that automation. So it's been great partnership for the last few years, for sure.
Yeah,
thank you.
For sure. Yeah, thank you.
All right, everyone. Have an excellent rest of the day.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.